Over the last 8 years, the United States spent more on defense than all other NATO countries combined. If all NATO members had spent just 2% of their GDP on defense last year, we would have had another $119 billion for our collective defense and for the financing of additional NATO reserves.
I don't know if these guys knew that they were on camera, but they were snickering at President Trump as he was telling them essentially it would be nice if you paid up. Only 5 of the 28 NATO members are paying the minimum 2% of GDP toward NATO. They are, of course, the United States. We've always led the pack here. Greece, Britain, Estonia, and Poland. But to show you how bad things are with France and Germany, Latvia is giving them a run for the money. Poland giving them a run for the money. Countries that can ill afford it are the same ones who are very serious, and they're not snickering at anybody. But it was very recently when Defense Secretary Mattis said, America will meet its requirements, but if your nations do not want to see America moderate its commitment to the alliance, each of your capitals needs to show its support for our common defense. This apparently is a dicey subject, but it's never a dicey subject when those countries, of course, need our help, and that's something that sticks in a lot of people's craw here, regardless of what you think of President Trump. This has been going on for many years under Republican and Democratic administrations alike, and we let it go on. And Donald Trump, a businessman by training, is saying, you know, this is not sustainable, so I want to change things, and they're laughing at him. Reaction now from Kansas Secretary of State Kris Kobach. Kris, I mean, that was pretty obvious, the laughing and the snickering, but he's raising a legitimate point, whether you like the president or his policies or not, that this is disproportionate. You talk about cumulative funding for NATO from its earliest days. We've picked up over half the tab, over half, and we're just one member of more than 24. What do you think?
Yeah, I think, Neil, you're right to point to this. You know, the snickering, in my opinion, is symptomatic of a larger attitudinal problem among some of our NATO allies, and that is that they don't take the United States seriously when we say, no, really, you have to pay your fair share. We're sick of paying more than our fair share for 50-plus years, 60-plus years. And so the snickering is, maybe it's just immature and improper behavior by a few people, but it is in some ways, symptomatic of a much larger problem. They just don't take us seriously when we say, no, we mean it. And I think they are going to have to take President Trump seriously.
You know, the one thing I think they forget is when they don't snicker when everything hits the proverbial fan, like, I don't know, World War II comes to mind, where we paid the lion's share of not only the battle itself, not minimizing their contributions, but after World War II, rebuilding Europe. We paid the lion's share of that through the Great Marshall Plan. So we have a long history of doing that. And I don't think we as a country, whether led by a Democratic president or Republican president, are searching for a thank you. But I do think we're due a lot better than a screw you. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree completely. And, there was a great deal of gratitude in the 1950s as we were rebuilding Europe. The Marshall Scholarships were a gift to the United States, giving 40 U.S. students the opportunity to go to England. I actually was a Marshall Scholar, and it was a gift of gratitude for the Marshall Plan. Now it's like the current generation in Europe has forgotten what the United States did for the European continent after the war.
Amazing, amazing. Kris Kobach, thank you very, very much.